Okay, so welcome back, everybody. I want, Kathy, you had somebody with you?
I do. I have a woman named Michelle Lopez who is in my congregation, and I think she's been in touch with you in the past, long time ago.
I
Well,
used to take classes through Rabbi and Novice at Women's Yeshiva.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear. She's far from the mic. Can you?
I took classes through Rabbi and Novice Women's Yeshiva online, Alana Nava.
Yeah.
And I came across you through him writing in your book, and I sent you an email years ago. So
Okay, I hope I responded nicely to
absolutely you did.
Great. Okay, so we have a lot to cover today, and today is a really kind of complicated lesson. So so let's start with our little Hebrew lesson. And I am very curious if any of you are actually doing what I asked in terms of finding a Hebrew text and pointing out the letters. So, but let's do today's letter, and then you can answer that question when I can see all of you, because when I share my screen, I can only see just a few of you. Okay, so this week's letter is the letter Vav that has a numerical value of 6, and I'm showing you here two forms of it. There's this form that looks kind of just like a straight line, and this form that has a hook on the top. They are both the letter Vav. Vav makes a sound V, and it's one of the 3 most common letters that we find in Hebrew. So when you do your practice with a Hebrew text, you will see you'll see Vav a lot. Okay, and the 4-letter name of God in the Bible includes a Vav. And a Vav, the word Va is actually, the name of the letter is actually a word in Hebrew, and the word means a hook. And the concept is hooking among other things, hooking things in the higher realm to the lower realm and being like a conduit for spiritual wisdom to come down from higher to lower. It is also, when it is added at the beginning of the word, it means and. So I wrote a couple of examples to show you. So if we say in Hebrew, Avraham v'Sarah, we mean Abraham and Sarah. If we say kafe v'lechem, we mean coffee and bread. Shabbat v'yom rishon, we mean Shabbat or Saturday. Hebrew doesn't have a word for Saturday aside from Shabbat, but it would mean Saturday and Sunday. So it is a letter that appears in the middle of words, and the Vav is also the word that means and, but it's not freestanding. It's always in Hebrew attached to another word. Okay, got that? So now that I'm looking at all of you, tell me, who is actually doing the Hebrew assignment each week? Yeah, Ada, you're doing it. Good for you. And Kelly and Margaret, great, and Andrea. All right, all right. So if those of you that aren't, before we get too far along and we have too many letters to hold in our head, the reason I'm suggesting this is that if you do it a little at a time, a little each week, then so we say in Hebrew kol hakavod, good for all of you that are doing it. Now you can add the letter vav, which you will find very often. And and it'll be much easier because now you're just looking for 6 letters. Eventually we'll get to 22. But by that time, the aleph will be very familiar with you, and the bet and so forth. Valerie, you want to say something? I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I must have missed the assignment. What assignment?
Because we started this before. But if you can already read Hebrew, this isn't relevant for you.
Okay.
But it's for people who are learning the Hebrew letters for the first time, or really trying to like master it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Now, so now let's get on with today's topic, which I really feel like I need to say some disclaimers. Okay. This was a very, very difficult lesson for me to prepare. I've had to on the one hand, oversimplify certain issues. And I also want to be respectful to the sensitivity of those among us who still identify wholly as Christian, but I also want to be accurate in representing a Torah perspective. So I divided it basically into 3 areas. Today's topic, by the way, is the Torah view of Gentiles. Okay. So I want to go through, how did humanity come to be divided into Jew and Gentile? Because that wasn't originally in the plan. Also, some categorization categorization of non-Jews according to the Torah. Thank you for laughing at me, Natalie. And how these identities will change in the Messianic era. Okay. Now, obviously, Torah perspective and a Christian perspective have two very different end games and 2 very different end game scenarios. Okay. But let's start with stuff that's a little bit easier and less sensitive. And that is how humanity came to be divided into Jew and Gentile. So first of all, I want to say that as far as I know, only Jews among all of the religions of the world have no goal to seek to convert other people to our religion. We don't need the entire world to be Jewish. That is not a Torah goal. All right. However, the Torah does have a lot to say to the Jew about how to live a life of truth and godliness. And also within the Torah, there's a full understanding of how a non-Jew, and a full understanding and a complete framework for how a non-Jew can live a life of truth and godliness. But let's go back to, why did God in the first place, God who is the creator and the sustainer of the entire universe, why did he divide humanity into Jew and Gentile? And for this, we have to go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, as we did last week, because at the time of creation, God made a single man and a single woman, and they were created as young adults, and they lived on an elevated spiritual plane that we call Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, where they were as close to truth and wisdom, and all of their needs were provided for. This, I'm just reviewing, you already know this, okay? And God gave them 6 moral precepts to uphold, okay? There are one thing that they had to do and 5 things that they were not supposed to do, okay? So the one active commandment that God gave them is to establish a lawful society, because Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, from them were going to come all of humanity. And once you have more than one person in the world, you need laws to regulate how you relate to each other. So to establish a lawful society, and the prohibitions are not to blaspheme or curse the creator, not to worship idols, or not to worship anything other than God, not to steal, not to kill, not to have forbidden sexual relations, which wasn't really relevant when it was only Adam and Chava, because they only had one another. But later on, when there were other peoples, that became relevant. The 7th law, which you may be familiar with, not to eat meat from a living animal, only became relevant in the time of Noah, when humanity was first given permission to eat meat. There are 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and during all of that time, everybody in the world was a vegetarian, okay? If we look at Bereshit, the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verses 3 and 4, God says to Noah, this is after the flood, every moving thing that lives shall be yours to eat, like the green vegetation that he gave to Adam and Chava. I've given you everything, but flesh with its soul, its blood, you shall not eat. In chapter 9, verse 3, Hashem gives Noah permission to eat animals for the first time in human history, but he makes a condition. And in verse 9, chapter 4, he prohibits eating the limb of a living creature or its blood. Okay. So in order to eat meat, there was a rule. Now, obviously, Jews have a whole lot more rules about eating meat and that are involved in the laws of kosher. But the minimum rule was that an animal had to be completely dead before you could consume its meat. Okay. Now, although Adam and Eve, fell from the exalted place after they sinned from failing to refrain from eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov Hara, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they still retained some of their original spiritual greatness. They retained their human faces and their upright posture. They didn't revert to being animalistic or animals. They retained the ability to speak. They retained the intelligence to understand the Creator and to fulfill his will through their own moral conduct. Now, we know that Adam and Chava were the ancestors of all of humanity, which includes both Jews and Gentiles, and they understood the Torah the way Jews today understand it. They were required to keep these 6 moral precepts, and they were promised spiritual rewards for doing this. Now, in the 10 generations between Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, and Noach, by the time Noach came into the world had descended into lawlessness and sin. You know this part, that and so God decides he's going to cleanse the world of the effects of sin through the spiritual nature of water, which is interesting. We've never spoken about this together, I think, but the concept of mikvah is a kind of spiritual cleansing through water. So in a sense, what God did with the flood is he kind of, however you understand this, it's like he immersed the entire world in a mikvah. And then after the flood, so Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives come out of the ark and they're looking at a world that is fresh and ready to be rebuilt. Okay, everything that had existed before is destroyed, including the rest of the people. And that's when Hashem gives Noah the 7th law to refrain from eating meat from a live animal. Okay, so these laws become known as in Hebrew, the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 universal laws for all of humanity that are still obligatory today. Immediately after the flood, humanity is still united. Immediately after, it's only Noach and his wife and his sons and their wives. It's just one family. But as the population grew, even still, all of the people that were alive on earth were still united as one people group, all speaking Hebrew, all living together in the part of the world between the Tigris and the Euphrates, which is kind of like modern day Iraq. And the people were very secure, and they were a little too secure, and they grew a little overconfident and even a little arrogant. And so together they decide to build the Tower of Babel, okay, in order to gain access to heaven. Now, God considers this a form of idolatry and punishes them by confusing their languages so that they can no longer understand one another. And this is the origin of the original division of humanity into the 70 core nations. People who share a common language settled in different locations. And now we have, instead of one group of humanity, now we have multiple groups. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, what's happening in Jerusalem? There are 2 men, Shem and Aver. Shem is the son of Noah, and his grandson Aver were teaching the 7 laws to anyone who was interested in learning with them. But for many of the new nations, now that they speak a different language and they are dispersed in the landmass, the distance to Jerusalem is too far. They can't have a Zoom session like we're having. And so instead, what happens over time, they develop their own idolatrous cults. And so into this history steps Nimrod, who is the king of Ur, and he demands that people worship him. Nimrod was not by far the last personality in all of history to demand that people worship him instead of Hashem, but he was the first. Do you know who Nimrod's primary opponent was spiritually? If you do, just unmute yourself and tell me. Okay, as soon as I tell you, you're going to say, yeah, I knew that. Okay. The one man who stood against Nimrod's false claims of divinity was Abraham.
Abraham.
Right.
Mm.
See, I knew you knew it. Okay. So more than 4,000 years ago,
It,
yeah,
it
Natalie.
takes time. It takes time to unmute.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so more than 4,000 years ago, Abraham reasons that only the Creator himself should be worshipped. And from Abraham comes the Jewish people, who have very much the same mission today, to teach about the absolute oneness of God. Now, fast forward, so that's kind of where it begins to separate into. We're not really Jews yet, but and this is way, way before Christianity and so forth. But yes, Natalie, you want to say something?
Yeah, maybe you can say also what is the name Nimrod, what it means, because when I knew in Ivrit what Nimrod means, suddenly you understand a lot.
What does Nimrod mean?
Rebellion.
Okay, so the rebellion that comes from this declaration that Nimrod makes is the rebellion that now is going to divide the world basically into the people who will become the Jewish people much later in history and the rest of the world. Okay, so now let's just fast forward to the time when the Torah is given to the Israelite nation. And the rest of the world was again given the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 laws of Noah. And the Israelites were the ones who were charged with teaching them. So from that point on, all of the non-Israelites who kept the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noah, who kept the 7 laws, were known as the Chazdei Umot Haolam, the righteous of the nations. Okay, so this is until the beginnings of Christianity. Many non-Jews studied Jewish wisdom. After the Romans destroyed the first temple and exiled the Jews, it became much more difficult for Gentiles to study the 7 laws or to keep them. And then as Christianity gets stronger and Islam arises, it becomes, for a Gentile to want to study Torah from the Jews, life-threateningly dangerous. And the Jews, who are under constant threat themselves, first from Christianity and then from Islam, all their efforts went into attending to their own safety. So sort of that relationship that had existed up until the beginning of Christianity was severed. And now 2,000 years pass until today, okay? And until today, many Jews, even today, many Jews are fearful. You probably know this, but if you don't know it, let me be the first to tell you. Many Jews are fearful of having substantive contact with non-Jews, especially Christians, because for the past 2,000 years, it's been neither safe nor smart to interact with Christians, with the Christian and the Muslim world. We have been preoccupied with protecting ourselves, which brings us to today, when the landscape is rapidly changing, and those of you that are here with me today are part of that. For the first time in 2,000 years, non-Jews around the world are expressing a renewed desire to connect with Torah wisdom, with the land of Israel, with the God of Israel, with the Jewish people. And some individuals in the Jewish world, like me, are beginning to respond to. And so this concept of Jews teaching universal wisdom of Torah to non-Jews is not new. It was just silent for 2,000 years. But now it's back, and we're all part of that return. Okay? Is everybody with me so far? Any questions before I go on to the next section? Okay. All right. I heard, Helen, do you want to say something?
So, well, is that because you think the Mashiach's coming soon? And
That's what I
this is
think.
like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
right.
In
That's
other
what I
words,
think.
In other words, how things have been is beginning to change in order to align humanity and to give all of humanity a chance to align with what the Torah says is the what it'll look like in the end Okay, so now I want to start the part that I'm a little nervous to share with you. And these are the categories of Gentiles, a simplified version of the categories of Gentiles as the Torah sees them. Now, once we begin to speak of categories of Gentiles as seen in Jewish law, things begin to get complicated because multiple terms overlap. There's different words that are used for basically the same category. But I want to at least give you some sense of this, of the main categories and what the distinctions are among them. So the first category is something we call goy or akum or nochri. These basically are non-Jews who have no connection to Torah or to the Jewish people. They may be pagan idol worshippers. They may be followers of a non-Torah faith system. They may be completely secular. Every non-Jew, according to the Torah, regardless of what else is going on for them, is commanded in the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 laws of Noah. But a non-Jew who does not keep any of them, does not know about them, does not care about them, is again variously called a goy, an akum, or a nochri. I'm going to explain about that. These are basically the various kinds of non-Jews who don't follow the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. A goy, the word goy in Hebrew literally means nation. So you could have the Israelite goy, the Israelite nation, but it's used in this context as someone who is completely disconnected from Torah. Akum literally means Oved Kochavim, which means a worshiper of stars and constellations. It's a rabbinic term that that the rabbis came up with in part in order to not include Christians. A nochri in Hebrew means a foreigner or a heathen. So sometimes the choice of the word in rabbinic literature was made to avoid offending Christian censors of Jewish texts. But basically, this category, goy, akum, or nochri, are those non-Jews who have no connection whatsoever to Torah or to Jewish people or to the land of Israel and all that. So that's the first category. Another category you may not have ever heard about is called an Eved Kanani. An Eved Kanani is literally a Canaanite servant. Now, the Torah distinguishes various categories of slaves. One of them is an Eved Kanani, which is a non-Jewish slave, either bought by a Jew or acquired through conquest. The most famous Eved Kanani, does any of you know in the Bible who's the most famous Eved Kanani is?
Eliezer.
Eliezer, exactly. Eliezer, who was the servant of Abraham. Okay, that is 2 points for Natalie tonight. All right. Now, this is not the Torah's version of slavery is not slavery like the violent, abusive kind of slavery that we think of as Westerners. The Eved Kanani actually lived a fairly comfortable life, had no responsibility for food or for shelter because those had to be provided. Furthermore, the laws relating to the master's responsibility to the Eved Kanani are such that there's a saying in the Talmud that one who acquires an Eved Kanani has really bought a master for himself. What does that mean? So the example that's usually given is if the household only has one pillow, the master has to go without to give it to the Eved Kanani. In relation to everything, if there's enough for everybody, that's great. But if there's a limited amount of a resource in a household, the Eved Kanani takes first priority and the master second. The slave even eats before the master. So even using the word slave, like it has connotations that we don't mean. But an Eved Kanani, the non-Jewish servant of the Jew, has to become a member of the Jewish people. So what does that mean? A male must be circumcised, and both males and females have to immerse in a mikveh. The non-Jewish male servant is obligated in the same positive Torah commandments as a Jewish woman is. So the main distinction, and this is a whole other discussion, but the main distinction between men and women in terms of Jewish law for Jewish men and women is that women are, for the most part, and there are exceptions to this, for the most part, are not obligated in specific time-bound mitzvot. So something that has to happen in a certain time frame, women are relieved of the obligation for that. Why? Because the rabbis understood that, especially when the lifetime the lifetime was much shorter, and we didn't have decades and decades after women were finished raising their children, that most of an adult woman's lifespan, that's the word I'm looking for. Most of an adult woman's lifespan was spent taking care of the household, taking care of children, and so forth. And so she is relieved of certain obligations that she does not have to. She may, and she gets rewarded for it, but she does not have to. Okay, so an Eved Kanani is required basically to keep the Torah in the same way that a woman is. He also, so all of the negative commandments he's not allowed to do, or she's not allowed to do, they get off for Shabbat. This status, by the way, does not exist today. It's a biblical status that isn't in the world right now, but there will be a voluntary form of this status that will recur in the Messianic era, but it's voluntary, and B, it's primarily for the benefit of the non-Jew. It's not, like I said before, the kind of violent, abusive, enforced slavery, as much as it is voluntary service. So an example I can give you, it's not a great example, because we do not make volunteers for Hayovel get circumcised or immersed in a mikvah. But if you're familiar with this organization, it's a Christian organization that's based in Israel, that brings volunteers to come and help Jewish farmers manage their farm. So these are people who are not Jewish, who voluntarily, not only do they volunteer, but they pay to come. They are provided with housing, and they work all day in fields. They're picking grapes, they're picking olives, they are cutting down grapevines, whatever they're doing, they are working on behalf of Jewish farmers as voluntary. It's not slaves exactly. It's not a good word. What's that?
Helpers.
Helpers, right. But in other words, they put themselves in a position of provide service to the Jewish people voluntarily, and the Jewish people are obligated to take care of them, as we talked about. Okay. So we have the Goy Akum Nochri, we have the Eved Kanani, which the Goy Akum Nochri does exist today. You may very well know people like that. The Eved Kanani does not exist today. Now let's talk about the Noahide. Noahide, which is probably almost certainly a term that you've heard, is an oversimplified term that refers to a non-Jew that keeps the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, that is committed to keeping the 7 laws that we spoke about, the 7 universal humanitarian laws. It is the lowest common denominator. Now, there are many, many books that exist today to guide the Noahide on how to pray, how to live. There's the Path of the Righteous Gentile. There is, I just pulled these off my shelf, the Divine Code. I can send you links to these if you'd like. There's even a prayer book for Noahide. Whoops. See this weird background thing. Okay. The prayer book for Noahide is called Brit Olam. And it's in English, actually. There is some Hebrew in here, but no, there's no Hebrew letters, but, oh yes, there are. Anyway, it is taken from a Jewish prayer book. And what they did was adapt a Jewish prayer book to prayers that are appropriate for non-Jews to say. Okay. There's also a really wonderful, this very, very small book that I highly, highly recommend if you're at all interested in this, called The 7 Colors of the Rainbow. And it's Torah Ethics for Non-Jews. It's a very small book, which is a really wonderful explanation of how we got to the situation that we're in. Now, for many people, a Noahide identity doesn't give them a whole lot to go on. Because as I like to say, it doesn't take that much time in your day to not kill and to not steal and to not blaspheme. right? There's not like a lot of stuff to do. And so for most people, a Noahide identity is not sufficient. It doesn't come with a sense of community. It doesn't come with holidays. It doesn't come with traditions. Having said that, the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws, are actually 7 broad summary categories that expand into much greater detail. So let me take, I prepared one example to show you how this works. So we know that there's a prohibition against theft in the 7 laws. So here's some examples of what that includes. It's the laws of returning stolen objects and restitution for theft, the laws related to buying stolen property or other ways of benefiting from theft, the laws of unintentional theft, like what happens if you end up with something that belonged to somebody else and it's in your possession now, laws of saving yourself at the expense, you're saving yourself or your property at the expense of someone else, theft that's caused by false measurements. Let's say that you have a vegetable stall and you weigh out produce whenever you sell it to every customer. If your scale is off, either intentionally or because you didn't get it serviced properly or something, and you end up overcharging people because the scale weighs heavy, that's a violation of this law of not stealing. Not stealing doesn't just mean, not holding someone up at gunpoint and saying, give me your wallet.
Yes.
Okay. Theft caused by cheating or misinforming another. Sometimes you can steal by using lies, basically. Laws about extortion, laws about taking collateral for a loan, laws about encroaching on real estate, laws about kidnapping, laws about taking captives, which is unbelievably relevant right now, laws related to paying workers, laws related to ownerless items. How do you know if something appears to be lost on the street? What is your obligation to before you can claim it as your own? Laws of bodily injury, and more and more and more. So each of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, each of the 7 Noahide laws has branches. I guess that's a way of saying it. So it's not that do inform daily life. So if you are okay, let's say you want to observe the 7 universal laws, and you work in an office and you are tempted to take home some office supplies. Okay, there are laws about that. So it's not uncommon. I think it's not uncommon in at least in the US, for people to think, well, I work for this big corporation and they're not going to miss a little box of paper clips. I'm just going to take them home with me because I need paper clips, right? But that is actually, when you study these laws as somebody committed to keeping them, that's something that you have to be careful of, because that is a violation of that. Now, here's a really, really uncomfortable question. Can a Christian who believes in the divinity of Jesus and also wants to observe the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, can they be considered a Noahide? So I have to teach you a Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is shituf, which is the concept of sharing. So, but in this context, shituf is the concept of worshiping God along with some other being. For a Jew, shituf is absolutely prohibited. That means that a Jew is forbidden from believing that Hashem shares rulership of the world with any other power. There can be, for a Jew, no other concept of divinity except for Hashem. And that's why those of you that are familiar with Shema, the 6-word introduction to the Shema says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. God is one. That when I was in my 20s and I was just starting to learn about Judaism, and I started reading and I found this idea over and over again. I went to talk to the rabbi. I said, why is the Jewish book so obsessed with this idea that God is one? And he explained to me then, and I'm explaining to you now, that this idea that God is the only creator and sustainer of the universe and does not share that with any other personality, power, or whatever, is the most Torah Jewish thing, basic idea. Okay. Now, I want to introduce you to 3 opinions that you'll see become more lenient as time goes on about whether Christianity is a form of shituf. So the Rambam, who lived in the 12th century Spain, says that Christians, under his understanding, are considered idolaters under Jewish law. In other words, according to him, shituf is not an acceptable belief for non-Jews either. All right. So that's what the Rambam would say. Now let's go, that's 12th century. Now let's go to the 14th century. 14th century France, there's the Meiri, another rabbi, that says that what is present day Christianity is not considered idol worship. Okay. And then we go a couple of centuries ahead to 16th century Poland with the Ramah. And he says that shituf is actually permitted for non-Jews. So let's go back to the question. Can a Christian who believes in the divinity of Jesus be a Noahide when one of the Noahide laws is not to believe in anything other than Hashem? It's not a simple question. And it largely depends on which rabbinic position a person relies on and whether Christianity is considered a form of idol worship that because it involves shituf. So I would say to those of you that identify as Christians or still have a significant spiritual relationship with Jesus or Yeshua, whatever you call him, that it is still a worthwhile goal for you to know the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, to observe them. This is sort of an academic question about whether you can still be technically considered a Noahide, and I think it's a question that the Messiah will answer for us. But for now, it's just important to know these laws and to study them and to be consistent. I don't think for many of you, the big categories are going to be terribly difficult. I don't think any of you are like murdering people or blaspheming God's name, God forbid, or anything like that. But the nuances of laws, as we spoke about, like if you work in a big corporation and you steal a box of paper clips, that is considered a violation of one of these laws. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce you to another term, which is ger toshav. Both the Noahide and the ger toshav are righteous non-Jews who keep the 7 laws of Noah. The Noahide, I said, is the lowest common denominator. It's sort of a made-up word for people who keep those laws. But ger toshav is actually a Talmudic category. It's a Talmudic subcategory of the Noahide. And the Talmud, it often is questioning what qualifies a person to be a ger toshav and what distinguishes them from a Noahide. Excuse me, I have the hiccups. So it's sort of like Noahide is the lowest common denominator, and then on a higher level is a ger toshav. Excuse me. It's crucial that you remember that that a Noahide is an oversimplified term, because both the Noahide and the ger toshav are righteous non-Jews who keep the 7 laws, but a ger toshav goes further. Today we don't have full-fledged ger toshav, but a ger toshav personally completely rejects all forms of idolatry and shituf, and they take an oath before a Jewish court. Now, in order to officially be recognized as a ger toshav, we need a Sanhedrin, which is the high Jewish court, which we do not have. Without a Sanhedrin recognizing the full status of a ger toshav today, it's impossible. But on an emotional or spiritual level, it can be important for a non-Jew who's at that level to take an oath in a lower Jewish court, like basically a Beit Din, a court of 3 rabbis, as a sign that they have left all faith systems outside of Torah. The ger toshav, we believe, will exist and will return to the world in its full sense once once we have a Sanhedrin and a ger toshav goes before the Sanhedrin and says, I renounce any belief in any faith system except for the Torah, a ger toshav will have the right to live in the land of Israel, and they may observe almost all of the Torah on an optional basis. Now, a lot of these words, I have more to say, but a lot of these distinctions and so forth are very nuanced. But as Geula gets closer, as redemption gets closer, as we're anticipating the Messianic Redeemer who is going to clarify all of this for us, these differences will become clearer. Okay, but here's an example that's relevant to us today. A goy, meaning that's that first category of someone who has no connection to Torah or Israel or the Jewish people, is actually, according to Jewish law, may not learn Torah, but a ger toshav can learn any Torah. And so it is through the reemergence of the ger toshav, which it's so hard. I want to be so clear with you. Ger toshav today is sort of a theoretical category because we don't have a Sanhedrin to recognize them, but there are people who do identify themselves as sort of potential ger toshav, and they may even, I know ones that have come before a court of 3 rabbis in Jerusalem and declared their allegiance to the Torah's rules for non-Jews. It doesn't hold weight in terms of Jewish law exactly, but it is something that for them, it was very important to do. Let me just go on because I want to say a few more things. I want to talk about some of the categories that are very fuzzy. So then we have a category called ger tzedek. A ger tzedek is someone who was born a non-Jew and who converts to Judaism according to Jewish law. Now, there's converts and then there's converts. So the liberal streams of Judaism accept converts who would not be recognized by Jewish law in the Torah world. There's a Torah standard for conversion that is much higher in the Torah world than the standards of liberal Judaism. So a ger tzedek is somebody who has fully converted, lives a fully Jewish life according to Jewish law. And there also exists in the world people who the halacha or Jewish law does not recognize as Jewish, but who have had a liberal conversion. And the last specific category is an Israelite, which is a person born to a Jewish mother. Okay. Now, I want to talk about 2 other categories that really relate most specifically, I think, to many of you, and that is someone who is Torah pursuant and also has a connection to Yeshua, to Jesus. There is no existing category for this identity, and it becomes very hard for people like me to answer questions about how they should behave because the rabbis didn't speak about people like this. There's a category that did not exist. So, for example, Jews have laws regarding things like keeping kosher, keeping Shabbat, not speaking Lashon Hara, not having evil speech. It's hard to identify a Torah pursuant non-Jew because these laws don't really apply to them. They're not obligated, right? You're not obligated to keep kosher if you're not actually Jewish according to Jewish law. You're not obligated to keep Shabbat. You're not. So it's an area that rabbis are grappling with and that I grapple with, how to advise someone who studies Torah and wants to observe, let's say the laws of Lashon Hara, the laws of evil speech. But the laws are not like I can provide guidelines. I can say this is what Jews do, but I can't say you may or you must or you must not. I can say that when it comes to the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. If you were to come to me and say, Rivka, I work for this giant global corporation and I want to take home a box of paper clips, they're not going to miss them. May I do that and still be considered a righteous Gentile? The answer to that is clear, right? Jewish law has what to say about that. But if you say to me, I want to keep the laws of kosher according to the way that God expects Jews to do that, I can explain to you how we do it, but I can't advise you that, I don't mean you personally, but maybe I do, because I've had this conversation with some of you privately. It's very hard to advise. I can only suggest, because none of it is obligatory except for Jews. Outside of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, which is obligatory for all of you and me and all of humanity, the rest of it is not obligatory. I also want to say something about the people who identify themselves as Ephraimites or 10 tribers or whatever you call them. You're familiar with this group? Is there anybody who does not know what I'm talking about? Okay. So there's no category in Jewish law for people who believe that they are descended from the 10 tribes and who want to rejoin the greater house of Israel while maintaining a relationship with Yeshua. There's no Torah path to join the house of Israel and remain Christian in any sense. Ephraimites have the same choice that any other non-Jews have, either to become righteous Gentiles by keeping the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, or to convert. Now, right now, in the time that we live in now, Judaism does not demand that people, not demand, it's not like a Jewish thing to have an idea that people should like, there's no punishment. I'm trying to be really sensitive here. There's no issue with some people not being, not following the Torah. That it is something that exists today in many, many dimensions, and it's not a problem. However, after Mashiach comes, and this is, again, I want to say what I said in the beginning, that I know that Christianity and Torah Judaism have very different endgame scenarios. So all I can do is speak to you about the Torah perspective, that that when Mashiach comes, there will be a change. And there'll be a whole lot of people who are going to want to convert, but it won't be a simple matter of converting. So there's basically three opinions about what happens to people who are not Jewish after Mashiach comes. One is that they'll convert volitionally, because the Jews are not going to demand that of anybody. One is that they will become Ger Toshav. In other words, they will accept upon themselves the universal wisdom of Torah, the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws, and they will have, if they go before the Sanhedrin, which is part of the Messianic process, they will have the option, not required, but will have the option to live in Israel if they want. The third option is that they remain Gentiles. Okay. Now, the Rambam, we spoke about the Rambam before, 12th century Spain, says that Mashiach will convince the whole world to serve God in unison. It's not necessary for a non-Jew to convert to serve God as non-Jews. Okay. So the Rambam says that for a Gentile who wants to have a place in the world to come, they don't need to convert to Judaism. All they need to do is to keep the 7 laws of Noah, because God mandates that. It is a Jewish obligation to get the whole world to accept the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach upon themselves. That is not something the Jews have been very involved in outside of Chabad. The Chabad community in the Jewish world has been actually very active in teaching the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach and promoting that. But it's actually an obligation on the entire world to teach the entire world these 7 laws and all of their like sub-laws, as we talked about. I just gave you like a small example so you can see how it works. Those people who accept the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach will be considered the pious among the nations, and they will be rewarded with however you understand this, a portion in the world to come. But their acceptance has to be from a belief that God commanded this. It's not enough to accept the Sheva Mitzvot because they make sense, and a person would think, well, that's a good way to live. So it has to be seen as an act of acceptance of Hashem's sovereignty. And that's an important distinction. Okay. So in order to survive, according to the Torah's perspective, in order to survive the end of days, Gentiles need to accept the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. And the condition, as I just said, for them to accept it is because God requires it of them. And they need to be observed with care. And that's what Jews are are required to teach the entire world. Now, the next stage, accepting the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 laws of Noah, in front of a Jewish court, once the Sanhedrin is reconvened, will change their status to Ger Toshav, as we spoke about. And then the other option, again, is a full conversion. A full conversion has 2 parts: leaving any Gentile belief behind. And the second part, that's part 1, because you can do that. A Ger Toshav just does part 1. They leave Gentile beliefs, but they don't become a Jew. The second part is actually joining the Jewish people. If the whole non-Jewish world, after Mashiach comes, becomes Ger Toshav, there won't be any more Gentiles. Now, in Zechariah chapter 13, verse 8, it talks about, I'll just read you the verse. And it shall come to pass throughout the land, says the Lord, 2 parts of it shall be cut off. They shall perish, and the third shall remain therein. So after Mashiach comes, the Gentiles who do not accept upon themselves the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach will be cut off. That'll be a third of humanity. According to this opinion, 1/3 of the Gentile world will become Ger Toshav, and so they will, they're not going to perish, but they will no longer be Gentiles, and they will survive. And the other third is as I understand it, is the Jewish people, either the people who convert to Judaism or the people who are born Jewish. So in conclusion, before I take your questions, the 2 most important takeaways. Number 1, Judaism does not require anyone to convert to be considered righteous or to survive at the end of days. And number 2, that the Torah includes guidelines for non-Jews as well as Jews. Having said that, the Torah's view, and I apologize for any discomfort that this causes, but the Torah view is that, I think I said this in a previous class, but that there won't be other religions. There will just be the Torah's guidelines for all of humanity. And then within that, somebody who wasn't a Jew has no choice. A Jew cannot escape the obligations that the Torah puts on him or her by virtue of having been born a Jew or having converted into Judaism. But a non-Jew can choose, and they can choose one of these paths that we've spoken about. Okay, now I would we have a few minutes left, and would like to open up the floor for questions, which I may or may not be able to answer, or reactions, or anything you want to say. Heavy sigh. Yes, Valerie.
This is one of the things that I think that you helped us with when we were in Israel. Coming through we liked to call it the messy movement, thing. What we were thinking that we should be Torah observant even when we weren't Jewish, that we were actually obligated. And people like you faithfully helped us to understand that God made the covenant with Judah and Israel, and if our mothers aren't practicing Jews, we are not Jewish. So therefore, we are not obligated, even though we think at that time we thought we were obligated. And when you kind of really realize that, it helps you be, number one, it helps you be at peace. But 2, it helps you, you have to make some decisions. If you really, really want to be a part of Israel, you have to join Israel. If, to be obligated under those things that the Torah mandates. And so there's, pluses and negatives for that, which everybody has to go through on their own. But it was very helpful for us to have it banged into us while we were there that you have no obligation. And if you do not convert, you still have no obligation, but you'll be blessed for any command that you keep. So, if you do a commandment, then you understand that the motivation is not a has to, but you did it because you wanted to. And that also helps for, people who grew up in religions that are kind of works based, like I get to do this. That's a whole different mindset than I have to do this. And the superior one is I get to do this. Like when we were there in the land and we were watching people that were doing things like going into work in soup kitchens and stuff, and they were running down the street, clapping their hands, is like, I get to do a mitzvah. Like they got to do so many good things, and their whole attitude is not what our previous religion kind of made it out to be, that all these people are in some kind of bondage. These people were so happy to do what they were doing, and they, even though they were obligated, they understood that it was because it makes you happy to do good things. And it really helped our understanding to understand that we were not obligated, we were allowed to do good things, and so it helped us.
So let me say something about this concept. It's a very interesting way that Torah presents this. When you have a thing to do, the higher level of reward goes to the person who is obligated. And that's because God knows human nature and knows that people sometimes push against, like if somebody says you have to do something, it makes you less want to do it. But if you do it out of choice, you have the benefit of pleasing yourself because you chose to do it. Okay. And so you have, the main lesson here is that all of you are obligated and fully obligated by God in the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 laws of Noah, and all of its specific details. And if you want to take on the additional obligations, in Jewish way of thinking, you do get a greater reward for it, but you also have a lot more responsibility. And it isn't, nobody's asking anybody to do that. It's not necessary to do that for God to consider you a righteous person and to give you some kind of an eternal reward. So it has to be, the decision to convert or not convert has to be coming from your soul. Like you need to be part of this people. And most of the people that I teach will not ever need to make that decision. I see that we have, hold on, I need to open my chat thing. Nope, not the whiteboard. That's not what I wanted to open. I want to open the chat because I see that and I want to shut this off. I don't know how to do that. Anybody know how? Oh. I have no idea how to shut off my whiteboard, but okay. This is a question. Do you think eventually the rabbis will have to address the Ephraimite movement? There's Christians who came to Torah because of Yeshua's example, but do not worship him and only worship Hashem alone. I think Hashem is moving people to obey Torah as the Jews do and not just basic Noahide laws. It's a movement toward righteousness, apparently. Okay, that's the question. Does anybody know how to shut off a whiteboard? Because this is, I don't know how to shut it off.
Can you just X from the top?
There's no,
Go back to the whiteboard and hit it again.
give me a second, because I want to try to address this question. None of these options seem to be working. I'm assuming you guys can see this, right? You see this whiteboard thing?
Yes, at the bottom, go back to the icon that says whiteboard and hit that icon again, and it should take the whiteboard down.
I don't have a what.
You should
You have to push. You have to put your finger on your screen. And things should come down.
No, I have my options are New whiteboard,
What-
existing whiteboard, share whiteboard options. But none of those. Okay, I don't know how to get rid of it. So, you would think that it would be a very simple thing. But I don't know how to get rid of it. Okay, so I want to address Brittany's question about the rabbis addressing the Ephraimite movement. I think that, not that I can speak on behalf of all of the rabbis, but I understand, because I've met a whole lot of people who are part of this movement. And here's the bottom line, and I apologize if this is painful, but there is no way to be connected there's no category in Jewish law for people who still have a significant spiritual relationship with Yeshua to rejoin the house of Israel. Ger Toshav requires separating oneself from all other faith systems. And so I think the rabbis are saying that the choice is up to you. Rabbis consider Ephraimites a form of Christianity because there's still that connection. As long as somebody coming through the Ephraimite movement is connected to Yeshua in some way, whether you think he's God or you think he's Mashiach or you think that he is your rabbi, as long as you have that relationship, as far as the rabbis are concerned, as I understand it, is you are still a kind of Christian. That's why it's like not a, it's not, now I see an option to close the whiteboard. Okay. It's not an option. Yay.
And to you.
It's not an option to come into Torah and bring Yeshua with you. I'm trying to be honest and gentle with you at the same time. It is a movement toward righteousness and it is a movement in the right direction, but at some point to be fully consistent with Torah teaching, one has to make a decision. That's I know that can be hard to hear, and I apologize, but I'll tell you something that an Ephraimite man told me once that I thought was kind of interesting, and that is that, and we do have to finish up, so I'll finish with this. He said, at the end, like when Mashiach comes, and we're all going to be surprised, and that that may be true because there are things that that are not clear that won't become clear until they happen. So I'm sharing with you as much as I can as I understand it. I apologize again if I made any of you uncomfortable. I almost didn't want to do this, but I promised A, that I would, and B, I think that it's important in our relationship that we can that I can teach you what the Torah actually says and not dance around that. So thank you for staying with me, and have a good week.
I wanted to say thank you for being forthright in it. It's not offensive to me to hear. Just put it out there. I just want to know.
Yeah.
It doesn't offend.
Thank you.
And I wanted to also say that too, Rivka. I can understand the reason we're in this class is because we want to know truth, and we want to know truth from a Torah perspective. So it's not offensive at all. I just don't want you to feel that you have to really hold back or really walk on eggshells. I just want you to share from a Torah perspective because that's what I wanted. That's why I'm here, to learn.
Thank you for saying that. Okay, have a good week. I will send the recording.
Thank you so much, Rivka.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. God bless.
Bye.
Shavua Tov.